feminists have asked for misogyny culturally really, really loud and clear. And not only am I not sure what's going to happen when they get it, but I don't know how anybody could really stop it. Hey everybody, it's Prince of Queens, and I have a scripted video or two, but honestly, I just can't really be bothered to record a long scripted thing right now, so I'm just going to ramble a little bit. I was thinking a fair amount about how horrible our economy is in the United States and how it had to do with these affirmative action quotas and the fact that the Obama administration was this intersectional feminist monstrosity that just tanked everything. And then not only did it tank things, but it put all these intersectional feminist ideologues in positions of power where it's going to be really hard to get rid of them. And it's going to be really hard to get them to stop tanking the economy because they don't know anything about economics. Like, okay, I've been thinking about this a lot recently in terms of just the grand scale of women in the Western world and how they function within economies, how they make their money and how they get rich. And one of the things that I think is, it's just undeniable when you go into looking at numbers, is that there's very few women who actually contribute a whole lot to the economy. Most women who make a fair amount of money are middle class. Very few of them are upper middle class. Very, very few women are self-made wealthy people. There are women who have married into wealth or married a man who became wealthy. And sure, there's something to be said for the fact that his wife kind of takes care of him and takes care of the kids and makes sure he's happy when he gets home and everything that causes a functioning economy. But these feminists and everything, they're getting their money from men. They're getting their money from taxpayer dollars, which mostly comes from men. Men mostly contribute to the economy. And everything, like all these feminists that work at these corporate companies like Facebook and Google and YouTube, they only exist there because of the men that built those companies decided that, oh, well, we should have space for women, or the government basically mandated that the space was there for women and underrepresented minorities and all these things like that. Well, what happens when the economy is supposed to get good again? How do you explain to these beyond entitled women that felt like they did deserve their jobs? Like the women that I grew up with in Seattle in the 1980s and 1990s, they legitimately believed that they were brilliant and better at doing things than all of the males around them, and that was just that. Every year in elementary school and in middle school, it was always females who were elected student body president, student body representatives from each class. It was always females. Females always won the prizes, like the school-wide who wrote the best story or who drew the best picture. It was always a female. And these girls thought that it was because girls were better than boys. It never occurred to them that they were being given these little favors. Now, in fairness to the entitled girls that just figured that that was fair, I didn't really think all that much of it either. I remember starting to think that it was pretty weird in high school. Like, I would make fun of the types of girls that were the suck-up girls that were always given these, not privileges, but prizes for basically being little suck-up feminist teachers' pet-ish girls. And I remember knowing one of them in high school who was one of my friends, and she was one of the worst. This girl, she was the typical feminist teacher's pet syndrome type girl. She's pretty smart, like she's above average intelligence, But she's not that smart. Her thing is that she always has known how to please the teachers, and she thinks she's really, really smart. And she's not even very humble at all. Like, she's actually really egotistical, and she sort of always has been, but she knows how to pretend that she's not egotistical just enough to make it seem like she's not obnoxious. But if you're actually good at things, then she'll make fun of you, except for she's egotistical. It was just this very strange thing, and she's really not that talented. She's a weird Marxist girl. Well, I remember being in high school, and I remember explaining to her, I was like, yeah, you and your little friends always won everything. Like, every time there was some sort of contest or anything like that, you guys always won. And she just said, oh yeah, me and my friends were all brilliant. And it was like, it's never occurred to you that there was something else going on. And this was during the peak of the third wave of feminism. The third wave of feminism, they say it started really, it was really kicking into gear during the Clinton administration, but it was brewing by the late 80s if you were in far leftist feminist areas. And Seattle in the late 80s was one of the most feminist places that you could be. So it was already like that. I was born into this alternate reality where merit was not very important. Being a good little girl was the golden ticket to doing well. And these girls, they were raised their whole life to be like that. Now, I internalized a lot of it. I internalized a lot of the feminist messaging. But of course, I was a boy. And not only was I a boy, but I was also pretty loud and restless. And I enjoyed violent things. And I swore a lot. And, I would get in little, not fights, but I would roughhouse and stuff when I was in elementary school. So I was not at all favored by the teachers until I was in high school. The teachers started to like me. But, I even absorbed a lot of the shame and, the messing with my head in terms of who actually deserved to achieve anything at all. And, to the point where I largely stopped trying, because I realized at a very early age that there wasn't anything I could do and that the game was rigged. Well, imagine the game always being rigged in your favor to the point where you got a fairly high paying job in the corporate world, over $100,000. And I don't want to say only for being a girl, but, yeah, for being a female, like, it's not simply for being a female, because then all of the females would have these jobs, but it was this long series of, being obedient during grade school, sucking up to the teachers. And then once you learned how to do that, then you realized that you could do well in school. And so you started getting into your schoolwork because it was so exciting getting so much better grades than all the boys. Because even though you knew that the boys were slightly smarter than you, because everybody knows when you're talking to somebody who's maybe smarter than you, like, you're like, okay, this person actually knows about all of these things, and they're really talented. They can draw better than I can. They can write these cool stories and everything. And then, I'm getting better grades. This is awesome. I keep winning. I must be awesome. And then once you get into that habit, like, if that I can only assume females got really, really into the winning, and they kept winning through high school, and then they got into a really good college, because colleges generally are much more likely to accept females and give them scholarships for various things, especially in STEM. And then you go your whole life thinking that you were winning the whole time, and then you get into one of these companies, and then the companies start kind of going bankrupt. How would you ever reconcile that your incompetence was maybe the biggest problem? I mean, for me, it's I feel like I have this horrible burden as a fairly qualified male who is a pretty quick learner and who can do a lot of different things. You know, I can do electronic music production, writing, playwriting. I can do a little bit of journalism. I clearly, you know, you guys have seen me do that type of thing. I can do video editing. I can do all sorts of writing. I can do theater directing. I have a pretty wide skill set. Like, I can do a number of different things. And I'm good at understanding people's motivations, what makes sense in terms of the grand political playing field of any given time. And so I can look through history and figure out, oh, so that's probably what this person was doing. Like, I remember having excited history teachers in college. Well, this was the community college when I was in high school. And I had this teacher it was one of his first classes that he was teaching, and he was really excited to teach. And I was one of the only people that was able to predict what must have happened in history based on what he had already told us about the American settlers and the colonialists and what type of people they were. He was like, so what do you think happened in the next year? And nobody would raise their hand. I would raise my hand, and he'd be like, Prince. And I would know. And he was like, you are so good. I can't believe you keep knowing all this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. You know? Now, there's a lot more that I could theoretically do as an individual. I'm not going to give myself too much credit for being super, super qualified. But I feel kind of guilty and a little bit almost hopeless because I did not fully realize just how much I had been held back by the feminist system until a few years ago. And then it really dawned on me. And now I feel a little bit guilty because I feel as if I had this big responsibility my entire life, being somebody that was of above average intelligence and who was given a lot of benefits. Like, I feel like the weight of the world theoretically should be resting on the shoulders of guys like me. And I should have been more proactive and doing more, because without me doing such things, our nation's going to fall apart. Like, guys like me are supposed to be maintaining things, right? And I've had that realization, and that's a tough realization. It's absolutely tough. But I'm sure it must be a lot more difficult for females who aren't qualified to realize that the nation is falling apart because they were given opportunities they didn't deserve. Like, talk about an existential crisis. I can't even possibly imagine what that would feel like. I almost would feel bad, but it's like, okay, you had your shot, audition over, move, get out of the way. You're taking up too much space. I've always hated that social justice term of, you know, white men need to stop taking up so much space. Like, what does that even mean? Taking up space? You mean existing? You literally mean that. Like, oh, there you are, being a qualified white male. Stop existing. It's inconvenient for the less qualified people. But that notion is built upon the foundation of assuming that these people were just given these positions because of privilege, and that's the narrative that they spun, because they had to spin a narrative that was literally built around the exact opposite of the truth, in which white men have been privileged over the last 50 years as opposed to systemically discriminated against by and large. Whereas by and large, white men have been dramatically discriminated against over the past 50 years in our nation. So I guess the point of this video is that unless women were to say, hey, I guess I'm gonna, you know, like, I guess the only way for women to not have men hate them would be if women were to say, hey, we kind of want a more male headed civilization again. And the reason I say that is because if we don't get that, maybe we're not going to pull through with our economy. Like maybe our economy is just going to go kerplunk. Like maybe men should largely be in charge, and that should be sort of assumed as opposed to it being relentlessly challenged as if they're doing a really, really bad job, when really the worst thing that's going on is these horrible, ridiculous, like feminist battle of the sexes that the feminists started. Like that's our problem. That's what's keeping everybody down. Like the fact that Hillary Clinton was so convinced that she deserved to be president that they spent like $1.3 billion that we know for sure just to lose to Donald Trump, who I'm sure we could have easily found a better candidate. And it was only because he was the one guy who was not afraid of the feminist bullies. And think about how much time and energy we wasted doing that. That's all on the feminists. So if feminists were to just say, okay, as it stands now, the way that our society is organized, yeah, we need a really, really good leader. We need somebody who's on it, who works tirelessly, who is going to make tough decisions, and ultimately that's going to be a man, because it turns out that when a woman tries to compete against the man to take the position from him, she doesn't have what it takes. She doesn't have what it takes. You know, like women can only rise to these positions of extreme authority when everything's going really, really great and people feel, okay, well, let's give the girl a shot. But that's only when things are going well. When things aren't going well and women insist that they deserve to be given a shot, even though things aren't going well, everybody's just going to start to resent them forever. And that's how things are.